All right, man. Peace. So, in light of the shocking Minnesota Vikings victory over the New Orleans Saints, I think that it's provided a lot of cover for Mr. Mike Tomlin and his team's very poor showing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. As we all know by now, the Pittsburgh Steelers lost at home to the Jaguars and once again underperformed in the playoffs. One has to wonder when Mr. Mike Tomlin will be put in front of the crosshairs. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Now, in case you missed it, the Jags are headed to their third conference championship appearance. Leonard Fournette was a huge factor against the Steelers, becoming the first rookie in NFL postseason history with 100 rushing yards and 3 rush touchdowns in a playoff game. Fournette has 5 rushing touchdowns at Heinz Field this year. Meanwhile, Big Ben is the first quarterback in postseason history with 5 touchdown passes and a loss. His 469 yards is the second highest total in NFL postseason history. And his career, including playoffs, Roethlisberger is 18 for 19, converting 4th and 1 rushes, but Pittsburgh didn't use him on either 4th and 1 play against Jacksonville and failed to convert twice in a 3-point loss.
And that's one of the reasons why Ben is so frustrated with Mike Tomlin and with the offensive coordinator, Todd Haley. You can see that Ben is done with both, and it would not shock me if you hear a lot of hullabaloo in the offseason regarding Ben speaking to the upper management of the Pittsburgh Steelers trying to get Mike Tomlin fired. He's been trying to get him fired for the last 2 to 3 years. And I think that Ben is frustrated that they're not keeping it simple. They're no longer allowing him to utilize quarterback sneaks in 4th and a yard or less situations. That play that they called when they ran the toss sweep to Le'Veon Bell, I mean, that was so ridiculous. That was a terrible call. I had no idea. Even if you're going to run the football on 4th and a yard, why would you toss sweep against the number 1 defense in the NFL? Made absolutely no sense.
Again, they're very good at stopping it. They had people in the A's and B's. I stand by the calls we made. We just didn't execute them. We wouldn't be having these conversations had we, executed those plays and such as.
Stop trying to pass the buck, Mike Tomlin. Stop trying to pass the buck. You made a series of very bad calls in that game. One of them being that toss sweep on 4th and a yard. The other being that onside kick with over 2 minutes left. You show no confidence in your defense, and that's your fault because you're supposed to be a defensive coach. One man, Ryan Shazier, goes down, and your defense totally collapses and becomes one of the worst defenses in the NFL. That's your fault. You're supposed to be a defensive coach. I don't want to hear you talking about how you called the right plays and they just were not executed properly. Any coach could say that anytime. Oh, well, the play didn't work, but we stand by it because it wasn't executed correctly. I think that Mr. Mike Tomlin is starting to feel the heat. I'm just getting a little bit tired of his cheerleader act. That stuff has been working for a long time. He's going to have to step his mental game up in regards to the game of football. Zeal can only get you so far. A lot of times, zealous people try to cover for their ignorance.
Such is life. So, I'm not looking to convince you or change your mind. I'm just telling you we were comfortable with the calls that we made, and they stood up in those moments better than we did.
Why the onside kick?
We wanted to get the ball back. We hadn't stopped them convincingly enough to take any other approach, in my opinion, and it was my decision.
Well, what does that say that you can't stop Blake Bortles in a pressure situation? In Pittsburgh, you felt like you couldn't stop Blake Bortles. Like, come on, bro.
Now let's get it back to First Take.
Antonietta, thank you. Brian, your former team, the Steelers, all cocky, busy talking all that smack about the Patriots' future contract negotiations while sleeping on the Jags, stuck to old school football under Tom Coughlin, defense and pounding the rock. Steven?
Well, one has to wonder about the culture of the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room. You have Le'Veon Bell, who is going to make a proclamation that he's not going to accept being franchise tagged right before a big playoff game. Of course, you have Antonio Brown, who makes a lot of his off-the-wall statements throughout the season. You have Ben Roethlisberger, who's probably as disrespectful towards his coach as any top-notch quarterback in the NFL. It's pretty much a cry or a plea for help. You had that big dust-up during the regular season with the offensive linemen who wanted to be present during the national anthem. And Mike Tomlin decided that he was going to force all his team into the locker room because he could not deal with the chaos that was being caused by the tandem of Kaepernick and Donald Trump. I'm sorry, but right now the crosshairs are on Mike Tomlin. And certain brothers might get mad at that. I don't care. He has not shown that he has the football acumen to go toe-to-toe with the Bill Belichick. And don't get me wrong, many other coaches have shown the same lack of acumen when being put before Bill Belichick and having to respond to his foresight and his in-depth understanding of the game of football and the ins and outs. But every coach does not have Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell. He has a top 5 player at all those 3 positions. How many other coaches can say that? How many other coaches in the NFL can say that they have at quarterback, wide receiver, and running back, they have at the very worst a top 5 player? At running back and wide receiver, you can definitely make the case that they have the best running back and best wide receiver in the NFL. And I'm going to say this too, and certain brothers might get frustrated by this. I don't care. Antonio Brown is the best wide receiver that I have ever seen, not named Jerry Rice. He's better than Sterling Sharp. He's better than Chris Carter. He's better than Michael Irvin. Better than Calvin Johnson. Better than Andre Johnson. Better than Terrell Owens. Better than Randy Moss. Yes, I said better than Randy Moss. Antonio Brown is better than Randy Moss. Is he as spectacular as him? No, he's not. But you can count on Antonio Brown every game. You can count on him to go over the middle every game. Will he do some silly shit? Like, stream Facebook Live when he's not supposed to? Yeah, he'll do that. But he's going to be there when you need him. He's always going to be there when you need him. That guy is unbelievable. He made some catches. And he's a little man. I cannot remember in all my time watching the NFL. I've been watching the NFL since 1990. I cannot remember a little man who played on the outside and was always winning those matchups with top-level cornerbacks. Like that guy always wins his matchups. That dude is like 5'9 and a half, 5'10. He is always winning in one-on-one situations, whether he's running post routes, out patterns, button hooks, making double moves, corner routes, fades. He's winning every matchup, every battle, making one-hand catches. That dude is unbelievable.
Stephen A., who's the biggest culprit for the Steelers' loss?
My temptation is to say it's Mr. Mike Mitchell.
Yeah, well, nigga,
obviously I'm very
you got the wrong mic. You got the wrong mic.
disgusted with what we've seen. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, well, we hear you.
I'm hearing the
Loud
dial
and
check.
clear.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
we got you.
Listen, Mike Mitchell is the big culprit. And the reason why Mike Mitchell is the biggest culprit is because he was talking before the game. Now, I understand that he went on Twitter and swore that, it was from weeks earlier and what have you. I get all of that. But the bottom line is we saw how the Jacksonville Jaguars interpreted it. Plus, according to a reporter, they had heard Mike Mitchell outside of the Jaguars, confronting the Jaguars, talking about, you go remember my name when all of this is said and done. It's not just him, of course, because he can play, and I understand that, and I'm not trying to get on him like he can't play, he's some scrub, because Mike Mitchell can play, and I got mad respect for him. But the bottom line is I don't care what anybody says. Ultimately, this comes down, unfortunately, it breaks my heart to say it, to Coach Mike Tomlin, and more importantly, your defensive coordinator, Butler, because here's the deal. You gave up 38 points.
Agreed. Thank you, Stephen A. Please call out Mike Tomlin. Look, I've been very patient with that man. I have love for the brother. I'm happy that he, as a so-called black coach, can be the head of one of the top franchises in the NFL, that being the Pittsburgh Steelers. When you think of the granddaddy franchises in the NFL, you're talking about the New York Giants, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Green Bay Packers, Chicago Bears. But Pittsburgh is right up there in regards to their legacy. You can argue that they're number one. So I'm very happy that Mike Tomlin has that position. But he has not improved as a coach since he's been there. Belichick is an even better coach right now than he was 20 years ago. Every year, Belichick is growing and getting better. And he does not try to cover up his ignorance with zeal. And you see that a lot, not just in sports, but in all walks of life. You even see it with brothers who try to pick up the Bible. They try to cover up for their lack of erudition with zeal. Right? Zeal can only take you so far. You'll find that when your knowledge improves, your wisdom improves. When your wisdom improves, you don't have to cover up your ignorance with zeal. Mike Tomlin tries to cover up his ignorance with zeal. That's why he had the nerve to say, we like the calls that we made. We just didn't execute. Well, any coach could say that, dude. Anybody could say that. We made the right call. Our players just didn't execute. Stop passing the buck, man. He sounds like a guy who understands that the crosshairs are about to be put on him.
To Blake Bortles. 38 points to a Blake Bortles offense. I mean, there's no other way to slice it. There's no other way to slice that. You got Leonard Fournette running roughshod over you before he hurt his ankle, okay? You had a third and 8, and Bortles connected with Marcus Lee. You had a 45-yard pass to Keelan Coles when the Steelers were marching back. He completed 5 or 6 of his passes for 120 yards in the fourth quarter, looking like Tom Brady for crying out loud, right?
And had that boy Leonard Fournette looking like a mix of Herschel Walker and Eric Dickerson. I'm like, come on, man. Once again, it didn't really shock me that they lost to Jacksonville because, that's become very Pittsburghian the last few years. Mike Tomlin talks too much shit before the time. He was talking about New England all year, which no top-level coach does that. You're not supposed to be talking about New England until you get there. Then he had all his other players doing that, and Ben was getting frustrated. Roethlisberger was getting frustrated by that.
Right here at this field, the way Tom Brady looked in Pittsburgh a few weeks earlier. This is the Steelers' defense. And so ultimately it has to come down to your head coach and your defensive coordinator, because we've been starving for some semblance of the steel curtain from glory days past. I haven't seen it since. This defense is good by the numbers, but
then that means you have to get them the same steroids that the steel curtain was taking. Because them guys back in the 70s, whew, they put the S in steroids. The steel curtain, all those guys on defense and then on the offensive line also. Them guys had all type of needles being poked in their backside, allegedly.
But it doesn't intimidate anybody, and yesterday was the latest example of that. I'm going to put a lot of it, however, on Mitchell, on Le'Veon Bell with his tweets, and anybody who was chirping and talking smack, because no matter what the Steelers tried to say, it is clear they were looking past the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's about the head coach not reeling them in. It's about a defensive...
How he going to reel them in, but he hadn't even reeled himself in? That's why I said he's the one who was creating that culture in the locker room. When you're a leader of men like that, the first thing that you have to teach men who are impressionable, you got to teach them tact and decorum. How you the head coach? You're supposed to be the leader, and you run around talking about New England. Oh, regular season matchup, 3 weeks ahead, we looking towards New England, and lost that game anyway. That's why he has guys in the locker room who are not buttoned up. Le'Veon Bell, Ben Roethlisberger running his mouth. And look, I understand why Ben is running his mouth. Ben is like, look, I'm 35, 36 years old. I'm more mature than you. You're supposed to be leading the men right. From what Roethlisberger says, that the practices are too hard, too harsh. But who knows? He could just be complaining because he doesn't like the coach. Then, of course, like I stated, you had the military veteran who was forced to not come out and do his little pledge of allegiance to the flag, right? Or to stand at attention for the national anthem, whatever you want to call it. It's just ridiculous, man.
Defensive coordinator that can't seem to get it done, and it's about guys on the defensive side of the ball that clearly couldn't get it done, and it's about a team collectively that was looking past the Jacksonville Jaguars and what made it inexcusable. It's not like you haven't played the Jacksonville Jaguars, who were 3-13 last year. They were a good team this year, and last October 8th, they came into Pittsburgh and spanked you.
I agree. That's the worst part about it. You lost twice at home, and the first time the team came into your place, they had their foot stuck knee deep in your ass. And you still lost?
30-9. How you could look past them is inexcusable. That is what happened yesterday as far as I'm concerned, and that's why the Steelers are home watching like the rest of us right now.
The greatest coach in the history of football is Bill Belichick. but my favorite coach is Mike Tomlin because...
Well, that's debatable. There are certain people who might say that the greatest coach in the history of football is Vince Lombardi. Some people may say Tom Landry, and some people may say Bill Walsh. But, I mean, if you want to say Belichick, I mean, I guess you can go there. But Bill Walsh wrote a book, I believe it's called Finding the Winning Edge, something like that. Something about the winning edge, which is a classic book, very, very hard to find. Very hard to find. But there are many who will say that Bill Walsh is the greatest coach in football history.
Because I imagine if I were a player, that's the guy I'd want to play for. You listen to Mike Tomlin talk, you think I'd run through a wall for that guy. And Mike Tomlin is to blame most for that loss. First, let's start with the overconfidence. The reason I picked Jacksonville, I thought it would be a close game. I wasn't sure. But the more I considered how overconfident Pittsburgh seemed to a team that whooped up on them 30-9, really beat them up at Heinz Field. The fact that that team that beat them up had this excellent defense, and you heard a defensive player chirping. Now, Mike Mitchell did that, as it turns out, weeks before, that game, and he was talking about the Patriots. But still, you're talking about the Patriots. What about the teams in your way? If you notice, Patriots players never talk like that.
Exactly. And, even though Mike Mitchell is a simpleton, I got to blame his coach, Mike Tomlin. Yes, your son could be a simpleton, but is he a simpleton because he's a simpleton, or is he a simpleton because his daddy's a simpleton and he's learning from him? Mike Tomlin is, proverbially speaking, the father of that team. He has to set the example, and he does a very, very poor job of setting the example for that team.
They talk about whatever game is in front of them. Where does that come from? The head coach. Comes from Bill Belichick. So the idea that Tomlin was overconfident, you even heard reports about it right before the game, maybe that has something to do with why Le'Veon Bell felt comfortable talking about holding out, going into the Jacksonville game because, hey, we don't have to worry about Jacksonville, we're going to play the Patriots. I mean, it just gave you this feeling that the Pittsburgh Steelers were acting as though they were on a bye week. They weren't on a bye. They had the best defense in the NFL, or one of the two best, along with the Vikings, to contend with.
And also, it's become the in thing. It's become in vogue in the NFL to talk down on Blake Bortles and dog him out. So I have no doubt in my mind that subconsciously the Pittsburgh Steelers looked at Jacksonville and said, this is Blake Bortles. All we have to do is stack the line of scrimmage, stop Fournette a couple times, get them in 3rd and 5 situations, and make Bortles beat us. The problem is that Blake Bortles was better than the Pittsburgh secondary. So what does that tell you about the Pittsburgh secondary? And I believe that Mike Tomlin started out as a secondary coach.
A team that beat him up. Who's to blame for that? Well, that's the head coach. He sets the tone. And then, in the moment of truth, in a game that was still winnable, he hadn't even hit the 2-minute warning yet, he decides to try an onside kick. This is not Monday morning quarterbacking here. That was the wrong call. And again, my thoughts went to Bill Belichick. I tweeted about it. This is why Bill Belichick, one of the main reasons he's as good as he is. It's just wait for the other guy to make a mistake.
And Belichick does not necessarily just wait for the other guy to make a mistake. Bill Belichick has everything plotted out according to scenario. And he has it ingrained in his mind. Of course, I'm sure that he writes it out on paper, but he also has it ingrained in his mind. Bill Belichick already knows what he's going to do if he's down by 3 with 2.5 minutes left, depending on the team that he's playing. And he'll look back at precedent, and he'll also factor in personnel. All these things, he already knows what he's going to do. When they got down 28-3 to Atlanta in last year's Super Bowl, when they panned to him on the sideline, you could tell that he was a bit frantic, but he already knew what he wanted them to do. And I know a lot of brothers are going to come with that the game was fixed. Look, we all know that a lot of these games are coordinated. I'm not going to get into that portion of the conversation. Point being is this, that certain coaches know how to adapt depending on what is necessary. And that is what makes coaches great. That's what makes any leader great. Knowing how to make the right moves at the right time, irregardless of quote-unquote pressure. Mike Tomlin does not have that.
Mike Tomlin panicked. He made a mistake. So both in terms of, this is my favorite coach I'm talking about. This is the guy. Tomlin's my favorite coach. But both in terms of the psychological and emotional preparation of the team and in terms of the call in the moment of truth, if you need to point to a GOAT, in this case, it is Mike Tomlin.
So, both of you guys say this is your favorite coach. I know Stephen A., it's your team. He's my friend, right? The reason I went back and spoke at the rookie symposium in July in Pittsburgh wasn't because of the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's because of Mike Tomlin, because Mike Tomlin wanted me there. And I agree with you totally, Max. When you look at Le'Veon Bell talking about 2 round 2 games, Mike Mitchell speaking about the Patriots. Let's go back to the middle of the season when Mike T was talking about we're going to play him in 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. And I'm not sure if Mike Tomlin's really your friend if he haven't told you to cut that bullshit off the top of your head yet.
And we'll have to see him in the playoffs again in order to get there. I remember thinking to myself, this is different for him. I remember talking to Mike T and him telling me, I don't want the media to have a window into my soul. I remember him being that way. And we've seen this with great coaches. We've seen this with great players. Eventually, you get comfortable enough to really start to say what you think. And I'm going to be honest, what Le'Veon Bell said, what Mike Mitchell said, that's how we think. We may not necessarily say it, but that's how we think. I always knew what was ahead. I always knew what we had to face in the future if things worked out a certain way. But I still work the same. So it doesn't stop the way you work. But what happens is when you start to say these things, now people can pick apart your words. Now people can pick apart your actions.
And also, when you start to say those things, that means that those thoughts are at the forefront of your mind instead of the background of your mind. The brother makes a great point that, yes, those are things that people are thinking, but there's a big gulf between thinking something and saying it. Because when you say things, what that also entails is that you're not truly concerned about the ramifications of those words. Words have power. Thoughts have power for you. Words have power for others. Words have power for the recipients. Thoughts have power within you. So by the time you're speaking your thoughts, you've already decided that you don't care about the repercussions or the ramifications of what you say. That means that you're not truly team-oriented. This is what makes Belichick great. He understands human psychology. That's why he forces his players to not say those things. Because when you say those things, once again, words have power. Those words not just affect you, but they affect the hearer. So your teammates hear those things, and now you have a mass of people who are not concentrating on the issue at hand. They're worrying about things 2-3 weeks in advance, and that can cause a collapse that will make what you think is so important in 3 weeks not be important at all. Look at Pittsburgh. They spent their whole season looking forward to New England. Now it's not important at all because there will be no game against New England. That all is due to Mike Tomlin not being able to control his own tongue, his own brain, and therefore his wards, the people who he is steward over, they also have the same issue. All right? That's why the scriptures tell you that you shall know a tree by its fruit. If your players can't control their mouth, why is that? It's because the coach can't control his mouth.
And there were calls in that game that Mike T didn't make correctly. The onside kick, I was saying in the war room constantly, kick it off. They're going to run it 3 times. So I can put this game on Blake Bortles. You will have an opportunity to win. There were many, the 4th and 1 calls. Ben Roethlisberger, 18 of 19 on 4th and 1s. You throw a sweep one time. Jalen Ramsey makes a great play. And then you have the play action pass over the middle of Juju Smith-Schuster, which A.J. Boye gets his hand in. Those were the wrong calls, period. But guys, let's be real here.
Well, you've been real. You've been real. So if you're going to say, let's be real here, that means you're probably about to say some bullshit. But let me say this. At least he stated that those were the wrong calls. And that's a big problem because Ryan Clark is noting and acknowledging that those were the wrong calls. But the person who should be acknowledging that they were the wrong calls refuses to do so. That's Mike Tomlin. Once again, that shows me that he's starting to crack. He understands that the gravity of admitting that he made the wrong calls in a game like this. That means that he's the reason why this team has underachieved and underperformed. He is not willing to take accountability for that. Once again, in my view, the crosshairs are moving towards Mike Tomlin's forehead. He better be careful. He better spend this offseason reflecting on how he's going to become a better coach, how he's going to start utilizing, more Machiavellian machinations, per se. Start thinking a little bit farther in advance on how your moves are going to precipitate further moves and just stop reacting so emotionally to everything.
Let's, for one time, give the Jacksonville Jaguars some credit. Blake Bortles was 9 of 21, 96 yards in the fourth quarter. When his team needed him, when he had to make plays, Blake Bortles made huge throws. The swing pass to T.J. Weldon, a huge first down to Marquise Lee and D.D. Westbrook, the touchdown down the middle on a great play call with the fullback slip. The Jacksonville Jaguars beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, and those calls that Mike Tomlin made were definitely a big part in it. But the Jacksonville Jaguars are a better team than they are.
Yes,
that's debatable. We'll never know if they're truly the better team because the Steelers were so poorly coached and so ill-prepared for the game. That's why you have a great coach. A great coach is supposed to make a matchup between two even squads. He's supposed to make that matchup an advantage for his own team because one can make the case that Pittsburgh's offense versus the Jaguar defense is a wash. So now it comes down to the Jaguars offense versus the Pittsburgh defense, which is supposed to be Mike Tomlin's specialty. Defense is supposed to be his specialty. So if they lost that matchup, who does it fall on?
And that's why they beat him twice at Heinz Field. And by the way, as much as I'll criticize Tomlin, also give him credit. While he blew it in the moment of truth with bad play calling, I believe, not to mention poor execution on the onside kick, etc., you got to give him credit for the fact that it was a resilient Mike Tomlin team that looked like they were done at halftime.
Listen,
and they kept playing, and Jacksonville had to win that game like a half a dozen times.
In 2010, we're in the divisional playoffs, and we're playing the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are up 21-7 at halftime. Me and Mike T are walking off the field, and he puts his arm around me and goes, "Hey, man, this is going to be an epic comeback that everybody talks about forever." Right? And I believed him.
Well, you should have believed him. You guys had Troy Polamalu at that time. Pittsburgh does not have Troy anymore.
Because he believed it. And I'm sure it was the same type of conversation at halftime. And the Pittsburgh Steelers weren't going to lie down. The Pittsburgh Steelers weren't going to accept defeat. But the Jacksonville Jaguars outplayed them. The Jacksonville Jaguars made more plays as a team. And
are y'all finished?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, please, Steve. Please cut his ass off. Cut his ass off like the barber should have cut that damn shit off the top of his head.
And so we can say what we want about Mike T's decisions, and I agree. Much of this loss is on him. Let's stop ignoring the Jacksonville Jaguars and what they're able to do, the way they pressure the quarterback, the way they play defense. And Blake Bortles, who I am so hard on, who that I would not accept as my quarterback if you paid me to, made great throws down the stretch. They won the game. The Jacksonville Jaguars deserve to be in the AFC Championship.
They deserve to be blah, 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 blah. See, this is the beauty of having a box.
Thank you, Steve, because he sees that this is a line of bullshit from Ryan Clark trying to cover for his boy Mike Tomlin. I respect that, but come on. Not today.
Boxing analysts like Max Kellerman. You
And a what? And a what?
Who's Mr. Big Shot? Don't necessarily have to be in those locker rooms. This is the beauty of talking to a Ryan Clark, all right, who was a former player, but now is gonna come into our industry and you gonna control the narrative. Let me show you how this works.
I'm just talking football.
Hold on. I'm coming. Here's the beauty of this, because you see, Ryan Clark, I have the luxury of knowing you, having spoken to you over several years now, and being allowed to defer to who you are and what your mentality is. I recall somebody by the name of Ryan Clark, Max Kellerman, Molly Mass. I recall somebody like Ryan Clark coming up to me on several occasions in the past. Yes, you got beat. And when a team beats you, you got to give them respect because they got it done. But at the same time, it's perfectly within your right to correlate what transpired with what their identity is. If the Jacksonville Jaguars had smacked the Steelers around and beat them 24-7, they got beat. Period.
I agree.
But when Blake Bortles and that offense drops 38, I'm sorry. That's not who they are.
Agreed. That's why I stated that the defense of the Jacksonville Jaguars and the offense of Pittsburgh is a wash. If you tell Mike Tomlin you guys are going to score 42 points on the Jacksonville Jaguars, I promise you he's going to say, sign me up, because I guarantee we're going to win. We're probably going to win that game by 4 touchdowns, because I'm sure he did not see his team giving up 45 points to the Jacksonville Jaguars, well, 38 points, not counting the defensive touchdown.
It's not as good as the Jacksonville Jaguars are, and they are very good. Their defense is elite. There is no doubt. Rough Riders and studs. On the offensive side of the ball, Leonard Fournette is a stud. We all know this. And the rest of the brothers need to be respected. But 38 points on a Steelers defense, that's the story. You can slice it any way you want.
The Steelers did to the Jaguars defense.
By Blake Bortles. Now, which one of you, if I sat up there and I said to you, what are the odds that Blake Bortles' offense is going to drop 38 on anybody? What would y'all have said?
0%.
So case closed then. Checkmate.
Thank you. So what's the story?
Blake Bortles played very well when he needed to. What about the fact that the Steelers' offense didn't quit and made... Antonio Brown made plays no one else can make. He made all-time great plays. The Steelers have a great head coach, in spite of what I'm saying about him today.
I agree with
They
that
have a
too.
great head coach, a great quarterback, and the greatest running back wide receiver tandem in the history of football. And those guys were making amazing plays to...
That's debatable. Look, I believe that Antonio Brown's the second greatest receiver I've ever seen. And at one time, I wasn't sure if he was better than Julio Jones or Odell. But in light of Odell's performance in the playoffs last year, and Julio Jones, who's definitely a freakish athlete, but I think that Antonio has an edge on him. I'm not sure if I will put the Le'Veon-Antonio Brown combo over Emmett and Michael Irvin. But you know what? It's close. It's close. But Emmett and Michael Irvin have 3 rings. But anyway, I'm going to wrap it up with this because Stephen A. pretty much checkmated the both of them. And Max Kellerman's just talking to himself speak as usual. Mike Tomlin, he better reflect in this offseason, because that Pittsburgh fan base is rabid. And after a while, a rabid fan base will come for your head. All right. But anyway, peace.